Think about the last time you were used, not robbed, not betrayed by a stranger, used by someone you loved or respected or trusted, someone whose voice still has weight in your head. You didn't see it while it was happening. That's the part that haunts you. You saw it after, when you'd already given the time, the money, the loyalty, the silence, when the cost had already been paid and there was no version of the story where you got it back. And here's what makes it worse. When you finally understood, you didn't just feel betrayed. You felt stupid, because looking back, the signs were obvious. The flattery that arrived right before the favor, the crisis that conveniently needed your help, the kindness that always came with a price tag attached 3 months later. But you didn't see it. Not because you weren't paying attention. You didn't see it because competent manipulation is invisible by design. This is what almost no one tells you. The manipulators who hurt you most were never the obvious ones. The cartoon villain, the cold, calculating predator who tips their hand. That person is easy to spot, and that person rarely gets close enough to do real damage. The ones who get inside your life look like love. They look like family. They look like the friend who finally understood you. That isn't an accident. That's the design. Manipulation that announces itself doesn't work. So manipulation that works never announces itself. It wears the face of the thing you trust most, because that face is the only face you'll let close enough to be moved. 500 years ago, a man named Niccolò Machiavelli wrote down something that polite society has been trying to bury ever since. He wasn't a monster. He was an observer. He watched how power actually moved between human beings, in courts, in marriages, in friendships, in alliances. And he wrote what he saw, without the moral coating everyone else insisted on adding. The result was The Prince, a book so honest about how influence operates that his name became a slur. We still call it Machiavellian when we want to mean something dark. But the darkness wasn't his. The darkness was already in the room. He just turned the light on. What you're about to hear isn't a celebration of manipulation. It's a dissection of it. Because here is the thing Machiavelli understood that almost no one wants to admit. A person who recognizes the mechanism of manipulation cannot be moved by it without consent. The pattern, once seen, cannot be unseen. The script, once read, cannot be performed on you in the dark. You are about to learn, with cold precision, how the people who have hurt you actually did it. Not in vague terms, in specific, structural ones, the same principles, every time. And when this is over, you will look back at certain relationships in your life and finally understand what you were really inside of. You think you can tell when someone is lying to you. You can't. Not because you're naive, because the lie isn't the kind you've been trained to look for. You've been taught to watch for shifty eyes, nervous hands, contradictions in a story. None of that matters. The manipulator who reaches you isn't sweating. They believe their performance more than you believe your own perception of it. That's why it works. Machiavelli put this in writing with a clarity that still makes people uncomfortable 500 years later. He observed that men judge mostly by what they see, rarely by what they touch. Everyone witnesses the surface. Almost no one stays close enough, long enough, to verify what's underneath. The mask, in other words, is not the disguise. The mask is the territory most people will ever access. This is the first principle, and the one that breaks everything else open. Appearance is not a layer on top of reality. For most relationships, appearance is the reality. There is no second floor. There is only what someone shows you and what you decide to believe about it. The competent manipulator understood this before you did. They are not pretending to be kind because they feel guilty about being unkind. They are pretending to be kind because kindness is the access pass. They are not faking warmth out of weakness. They are faking warmth because warmth is the door that opens. The performance is not a moral failure on their part. It's a tool. And like all tools, it gets sharper with use. Notice what this means. You cannot detect this person by waiting for them to slip. They don't slip. The tells you're looking for don't exist because there is no internal conflict between who they are and who they're showing. They are not hiding a real self under the performance. The performance is what they have decided to be, in your presence, for as long as it serves them. So if the surface is unreliable, what do you watch instead? You watch the gap between what someone says and what someone does, over time. Not in a single moment, in a pattern. The person who tells you they value honesty but lies casually about small things. The person who claims to be there for you but is mysteriously unavailable the moment you actually need something. The person whose generosity is loud and whose follow-through is quiet. The person whose words about you, behind your back, you've started to hear about from too many separate sources to dismiss. The signal is never in one event. The signal is in the accumulation. And this is what most people refuse to do. Track. Because tracking feels like paranoia, like distrust, like a betrayal of the relationship. So they stay in the surface. They keep judging by what they see. And the manipulator stays exactly one move ahead, because the manipulator knows that's where you'll keep looking. Here is what to take from this section and to start using before the video is over. Pick one person in your life whose intentions you have begun to quietly question, and stop watching what they say. Watch only what they do over the next 30 days. Write nothing down, just notice. Most of what you need to know, you will know by the second week. But none of this answers the deeper question. How does this person, this performer, get you to want what they want, without you ever feeling pushed? That mechanism has a name, and it almost always begins with a gift. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You think generosity is proof of love. It isn't. Sometimes it is, but not always. And the difference is where most of your pain has come from. The gift you didn't ask for. The favor that arrived when you were vulnerable. The friend who picked up the check again. The partner who paid for the trip. Who covered the rent that month. Who handled the thing you couldn't. None of that is automatically suspect. But none of it is automatically clean either. And the people who have hurt you most knew this before you did. Machiavelli watched princes use generosity as a weapon for an entire career. He saw that liberality, when given strategically, was not a kindness extended to others. It was a bond placed on them. The receiver doesn't experience it as a chain. They experience it as warmth, as care, as being seen. The chain reveals itself only later, at the precise moment the giver wants something, and the receiver discovers they cannot say no without becoming the kind of person they don't want to be. This is the architecture of the gift that is a leash. It works because of something so deep in human psychology that almost no one can override it. The obligation reflex. When someone gives to you, your nervous system files an invisible debt. You don't choose to feel it. You just feel it. And the manipulator is not someone who creates this reflex. They are someone who knows it's already there and aims at it. Watch what the competent manipulator never does. They don't ask first. They don't negotiate. They don't say, "If I help you with this, would you consider doing this for me?" That kind of transparency is for amateurs and honest people. The skilled operator gives without naming a price. The price comes later, often months later, in a moment that feels unrelated. And by then, your refusal to pay it doesn't feel like protecting yourself. It feels like betraying them. That is the trap, not the gift. The asymmetry between the gift and the ask. Notice how the pattern actually unfolds in real life. The new partner who, 2 months in, makes a grand gesture you didn't request. And then, 6 months later, asks for something that under any normal calculation you would refuse. The boss who was generous with your career early on and now expects loyalty that costs you your weekends, your boundaries, your dignity. The family member who reminds you, always indirectly, of what they did for you when you were younger. The friend whose help came with no conditions at the time, but whose conditions, you now realize, were always there, just not yet activated. You are not paranoid for noticing this. You are finally paying attention. Here is the practice. When someone gives you something significant, especially someone whose patterns you don't yet fully know, do not refuse it and do not feel guilty. Just mark the moment, note it internally, and then watch, over the next weeks and months, for the ask. If the ask never comes, the gift was a gift. If the ask arrives wearing the face of, "After everything I've done for you," you have your answer. The generosity was never the relationship. The generosity was the down payment on a future demand. And once you start watching for this, you'll notice something else. The manipulator doesn't just give to make you owe. They give to map you. Every gift they offer, every favor they extend, is also a test to see what moves you, what softens you, what you cannot resist. They are not building closeness. They are building a profile. And in the next part, we'll uncover exactly how that profile gets used against you. You think someone who pays attention to you is someone who cares about you. They're not always the same person. And the people who hurt you most have already used this confusion against you. There is a kind of attention that is love, and there is a kind of attention that is reconnaissance. They feel almost identical from the inside. Both make you feel seen. Both make you feel like, finally, someone is interested. Both ask the questions no one else has asked. The difference is what gets done with the answers. Machiavelli understood that the prince who survived was the prince who knew the men around him. Not in the abstract, but in the specific. He insisted that political skill was, at its core, knowledge of human nature applied to particular humans. Not a theory of people, a study of this person, their fears, their wounds, their hungers, the thing they cannot say no to, the thing they will compromise themselves to avoid. That same study, transferred to private life, is what the skilled manipulator is doing while you think you're being known. They are not memorizing your favorite coffee order out of affection. They are noticing what makes you light up and what makes you flinch. They notice the story you tell about your mother and how your face changes when you tell it. They notice that compliments about your intelligence land harder than compliments about your appearance, or the reverse. They notice when you go quiet. They notice what you defend and what you abandon under pressure. They are building a map, and the map has only one purpose: to know exactly where to press when they need you to move. This is the part that's hardest to accept, because the early stages of this don't feel like surveillance. They feel like the most intimate thing that has ever happened to you. Someone is finally curious. Someone finally remembers the small things. Someone finally asks the deeper question. And in a world where most people barely listen at all, the experience of being studied feels indistinguishable from the experience of being loved, until it's used. Here's how you tell the difference, and you can begin testing this immediately. Real attention has no agenda attached to its memory. The person who loves you remembers the small thing because the small thing is you, and you matter to them. The person who is mapping you remembers the small thing because they will need it later. The use case is the giveaway. Watch what gets remembered, and watch when it gets brought up. If the deepest things you've shared keep reappearing, not in tenderness, but in arguments, in negotiations, in moments when they need you to do something, you are not being known. You are being managed. The lever is the wound you trusted them with. The fear of being abandoned, told to a partner in a vulnerable moment, becomes the threat used to keep you compliant. The shame about your family, shared with a friend over wine, becomes the offhand reference dropped in front of others to keep you small. The insecurity about your work, confessed to a colleague, becomes the precise pressure point applied when they need you to take on what shouldn't be yours. None of this requires malice in the moment. It only requires memory, and a willingness to use it. Sit with this question for the next week and answer it honestly. Which of your deepest vulnerabilities does this person in your life right now somehow always seem to know exactly when to touch? If a name came to mind, you have your work to do. But there's still one piece missing, because knowing your levers isn't enough. The skilled manipulator also has to make sure no one else can show you what's happening. And that requires something far more deliberate: the slow, careful narrowing of your world. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. You thought it was a sign of how special you were to them. It wasn't. It was the structure. When someone slowly becomes the center of your world, when their version of events becomes the version you trust most, when their read on your friends becomes the read you adopt, when you find yourself checking with them before forming an opinion about something you used to know your own mind on, you are not in a deep relationship. You are inside an architecture. And the architecture has a function. Machiavelli was explicit about this in a way that polite political theory has never quite forgiven him for. He understood that any power, to maintain itself, has to control the information reaching the person it's controlling. He warned that a ruler surrounded by people who tell him only what he wants to hear is a ruler who has lost the ability to perceive his own situation. That observation, written about princes, applies with brutal precision to private life. Whoever controls the information you receive controls the decisions you make. Always. This is not a theory. This is a mechanism. And the mechanism doesn't arrive announcing itself. It arrives as care. The new partner, who subtly criticizes your closest friend. Not directly, just enough seeds planted to make you start seeing that friend differently. The family member, who positions themselves as the only one who really understands you, while every other voice in the family becomes, in their telling, somehow toxic, jealous, or dangerous. The mentor who frames every outside perspective as naive, conventional, beneath what the two of you are building. The partner who is hurt, always hurt, when you mention what someone else said, until eventually you stop mentioning it. You don't notice the wall going up because each brick looks like intimacy. But here is the test. A relationship that makes you stronger expands the number of perspectives you can hold at once. A relationship that is narrowing, you reduces them. You stop calling the friend who used to tell you the truth. You stop bringing up the doubt because the response is too costly. You stop trusting your own perception because their interpretation has become the only interpretation you encounter. And at some point, you wake up inside a world where there is one voice, one frame, one narrator. And that narrator is the person whose interests are being served by your compliance. This is what cult psychology and abusive relationship dynamics share at the structural level. It is also what every quietly controlling family operates by. The manipulator does not need to lie to you about reality. They only need to be the only one telling you what reality is. So how do you check yourself? You go find the people you used to talk to and don't anymore. And you ask yourself honestly why you stopped. Not what you tell yourself. The real reason. If the real reason is that someone in your life made it costly, exhausting, or guilt-laden to maintain those relationships, you have just located the architecture. The wall is there. You just hadn't named it yet. Then you do the harder thing. You make one phone call this week to someone whose perspective you have been avoiding. Not to complain, not to confess, just to listen to how they describe the situation you're in. You may discover that the picture you've been holding is the only picture you've been allowed to hold. That recognition alone, before you do anything else, will begin to dissolve the structure. But isolation is only half of the trap. The other half is what keeps you walking back into it even after you've started to see it. Because the same person who narrows your world is also, somehow, the person whose kindness you cannot stop chasing. And in the next part, we'll dissect exactly how that kindness has been engineered to keep you reaching. You think someone who is kind to you cannot also be the one harming you. They can, and kindness is part of the harm. This is the piece almost no one gets, because it violates something deep in how we want the world to work. We want cruelty and care to come from different people. We want the villain and the lover to be separate categories. So when the same person who hurts us also brings us coffee in the morning, also remembers our birthday, also says the thing we needed to hear when we needed to hear it, we conclude they cannot be the source of what's wrong. The math doesn't work. But the math was never supposed to work. The math is the trap. Machiavelli understood that a ruler who was only feared was hated, and a ruler who was only loved was discarded. The skilled prince operated on both registers, deliberately, alternating between them in ways that kept the people around him forever uncertain, forever adjusting, forever working to earn the better version of him. That observation, which he applied to states, describes with eerie precision what happens inside a manipulative relationship. Pure cruelty drives people away. Pure kindness fails to control them. The mechanism that holds someone is the calculated alternation between the two. This is why you cannot leave. Not because the bad moments are bad. You could leave bad moments. You can't leave because right when you've decided you're done, right when you've gathered the certainty, right when you've started imagining your life on the other side, the kindness returns, the apology arrives, the tenderness reappears. The version of them you fell for is suddenly, miraculously, in the room again. And you breathe. You think, see, this is who they really are. The bad part was the aberration. This is the truth. It isn't. The kindness is not more real than the cruelty. They are the same instrument, played in two registers. Behavioral science has a name for what this does to your nervous system. Intermittent reinforcement. Reward delivered on an unpredictable schedule produces the most persistent, the most compulsive, the hardest to extinguish behavior of any training pattern known. It is the same mechanism that keeps people pulling slot machine levers for hours. Your psychology was not built to survive it. The unpredictable return of warmth, after stretches of coldness or harm, does not register in your brain as relief. It registers as something far more dangerous, as hope. And hope, in this context, is the chain. This is why you keep going back, why you defend them to people who love you, why you remember the good moments with disproportionate weight, why every time it happens again, you find yourself somehow surprised. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was engineered to do under intermittent reinforcement. There is nothing wrong with you. There is something wrong with the schedule you are inside of. So how do you break it? You stop measuring the relationship by the high points and start measuring it by the average. Pull back from the peaks, the apology, the gesture, the perfect moment, and look at the entire month. Look at the entire year. Ask yourself, with the kind of clarity you would extend to a friend in your situation, across the whole arc of this, am I being treated well, or am I being trained to keep reaching for treatment that occasionally arrives? The answer, once you let yourself actually see it, will not be ambiguous. But seeing the pattern is not the same as being free of it. There is one final piece. The truth about why you stayed inside it for so long. And it isn't what you think. You already knew. That is the sentence almost no one wants to hear, and the one that will set you free if you can survive it. In every relationship where this happened to you, the manipulation, the leash, the architecture, the kindness that punished, there was a moment, often early, when something inside you whispered, a small disturbance, a flicker of doubt, a feeling before you had the language for it that something was off, and you overruled it. You told yourself you were being unfair, paranoid, unkind. Some part of you knew, and that part of you was right. This is the hardest truth Machiavelli leaves us with. though he never says it directly. He spent an entire book describing how power moves on people. And the implicit conclusion is that the only person who cannot be moved unconsciously is the person who has stopped lying to themselves about what they perceive. The principles he documented are not magic. They are mechanical. They work on people who refuse to see them. They lose almost all their force on people who do. This is what protects you. Not cynicism, not suspicion of everyone, not a hardened heart. Clarity, the willingness to trust the small flicker of perception before it becomes the large catastrophe of regret. Because here is what you have learned in this video, distilled to its bones. Manipulation hides inside affection because affection is the only door it can use. The gift precedes the ask. The attention is reconnaissance. The narrowing of your world is not closeness, it is engineering. The kindness that returns after harm is not love, it is the schedule that keeps you reaching. None of this is hidden anymore. Once you've seen the pattern cannot perform on you in the dark. But seeing it is not the same as being free of it. There is one more thing you have to do, and it is harder than learning the principles. You have to forgive yourself for not seeing it sooner. Because the version of you who didn't see it wasn't stupid and wasn't weak. That version was operating with the only information available. The information the manipulator was willing to release. You cannot defeat a game whose rules you have never been shown. Now you have been shown. The challenge from here is not to become hard. It is to become precise. To trust people, but to trust your own perception of them more. To remain capable of love without remaining available to be moved by anyone who decides to study you. To hold the structure of every relationship in your awareness, not as paranoia, but as the simple respect you owe yourself. The respect of seeing what is actually there. This is what Machiavelli was offering, underneath the reputation that has clung to his name for 5 centuries. Not a manual for becoming a manipulator, a manual for becoming someone who cannot be manipulated without consenting to it. The difference between those two is the difference between a life lived inside other people's designs and a life that is, finally, your own. If something in this hit a nerve, if a name surfaced, if a relationship came into focus, if you recognize the shape of something you've been inside of, sit with it before you scroll. Leave a comment, even one word, naming what you saw. Sometimes saying it makes it real enough to act on. And one last thing, because this matters. What you just sat through is not the kind of recognition that completes itself in a single video. The work has already started in you, whether you wanted it to or not. There is more here, in the territory you've just stepped into, and the next piece is waiting for you when you're ready. You'll know.